our speakers will be speaking in English and sometimes in Thai, and also our speaker from Indonesia will be speaking in Bahasa Indonesia. So please click on the desired interpretation channel to listen to our speakers. We only have 5 customized channels for English, Cambodian, Khmer, Bahasa Indonesia, Myanmar, Thai, and Vietnamese. So if you want to listen in Lao, please click the Spanish channel for translation. A recording of this webinar, including the PowerPoint presentations and materials, will be available at our ASEAN-ACT portal. Our ASEAN-ACT portal will be posted in our chat box. Now, to formally open the webinar and deliver her keynote remarks, we are very pleased and fortunate to have with us again Acting Counselor of the ASEAN Mission to the ASEAN, Ms. Danielle Seaver. You have the floor, first Counselor Danielle.
Thank you very much, Darlene. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Great. Counter-trafficking partners, practitioners, advocates, and other distinguished colleagues from around the ASEAN region and beyond. Welcome to the first ASEAN Australia Counter-Trafficking webinar for 2022. This is a continuation of our series since 2020, which explores adaptive justice responses to trafficking in persons. This month marked 5 years since the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, entered into force. So it's timely that we reflect on our progress in our webinar today, centred around the theme of ACTIP 5 years on, how does human trafficking data advance human rights? I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished panellists. We are honoured to have Dr. H. Andi Samsung Ngawu for Judicial Supreme Court of the Republic of Indonesia. Prosecutor Minwarin Sisiripon, Divisional Public Prosecutor for the Department of Trafficking in Persons Litigation from the Office of the Attorney General in Thailand, and author of the Baseline Report, which will be officially launched today, ASEAN-ACT's Senior Advisor Kate Summer. We are also thrilled to have a special recorded appearance by the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Trafficking in Persons, Professor Siobhan Malali. Human trafficking is a billion-dollar global industry, with operations that are largely invisible to most of us, victims who are unidentified. As such, it is no surprise that credible and consistent data on human trafficking is rare and challenging, especially when it comes to capturing the experience of victims of human trafficking. Yet, data is fundamental to every decision made by victims, law enforcement, courts, and other government and non-government agencies in preventing and responding to human trafficking. Without data, it is difficult to tell whether trafficking patterns are changing, how effectively resources allocated to counter-trafficking are being spent, and what efforts might be needed to improve counter-trafficking responses. More importantly, without data, it is difficult for a victim of trafficking to make an informed decision about whether to participate in a criminal justice process and agree to give evidence in a trafficking case. The topic of today's discussion reflects work underway through ASEAN-ACT to improve the collection, analysis, and publication of human trafficking data. Throughout 2020 and 2021, ASEAN-ACT worked with a range of ASEAN member states to develop and start to implement 8 victim-sensitive indicators. The indicators have been developed to help judges, prosecutors, court staff, and others involved in a trafficking case to understand and implement a victim-centered approach to improve the collection, analysis, and reporting of trafficking in persons data, particularly data that relates to the protection and support provided. ASEAN-ACT has also developed 22 TIP key performance indicators. As part of this project, ASEAN-ACT has collated and analysed trafficking in persons annual reports that ASEAN member states have published in 2020, which provide an indication of how member states are approaching reporting against their obligations in the ACTIP. Today's ASEAN-ACT Senior Advisor, Kate Summer, will present the findings of this study, including new TIP data tools to support the recommendations outlined in the report. The report can be accessed through the ASEAN-ACT website, which will be updated and published annually over the life of the program. In committing to the ACTIP, ASEAN member states have identified that the sensitive treatment of victims at every stage during a trafficking case should be a priority. recognizing that participating in a criminal case can be a traumatizing experience and victims will want to make an informed decision about whether to act as a witness. Without national data on tip cases that explains the outcomes for both the trafficker and the victim, it is difficult for a victim to make this informed decision. ASEAN-ACT's baseline report illuminates how trafficking cases are handled and reported across the ASEAN region. The report focuses particularly on the treatment of victims who are critical witnesses in trafficking cases. It's our hope that through spotlighting the treatment of victims of trafficking and encouraging ASEAN member states to report improved outcomes for victims over time, that this in turn may spur more victims to testify in trafficking cases in the future. I'm very excited this webinar will not only share findings and recommendations, but also highlight the significance of collecting and publishing data to advance victims' rights. We will discuss the value of having robust tip data to effectively respond to emerging patterns and measure the progress of implementing victim-sensitive approaches. As the cover of this baseline report symbolises, robust and transparent data will bring trafficked victims out of the shadows and to the forefront. I'm very keen to also hear the reflections and perspectives of our esteemed guests today. And on a final note, I must raise Australia's grave concerns about the situation in Myanmar. Australia supports ASEAN's crucial role in responding to the situation. ASEAN-led efforts represent tangible steps towards ending the violence and the commencement of dialogue between all parties concerned. We reiterate the importance of the full and timely implementation of the 5-point consensus agreed by ASEAN leaders and the leader of Myanmar's military in April, and we call for the immediate release of those arbitrarily detained, including Professor Sean Turnell. On behalf of the Australian Government and ASEAN-ACT, thank you for your strong interest and participation, and I look forward to this important and insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Danielle, for the very enlightening message. It has certainly set the tone of the webinar today on trafficking persons data as a key ingredient for relevant counter-trafficking actors, including victims, in making informed decisions, and of course, the highlights of publishing this data. Now, before our conversation becomes very serious later on, that we might forget to smile, let us take a group photo first. Everyone, please kindly put your camera on, and on cue, our Bangkok Excellent Support Team will take a screenshot. Vicky, just let us know when you're ready.
3, 2, 1.
Shall we do the wave, Vicky?
Yes, please. 3, 2, 1.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful smiles. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Vicky. May I now share with you very briefly some relevant feedback from the previous webinar that was conducted on December 9 last year. It was about the approaches to supporting victims of trafficking to reflect, recover, and reintegrate into a safe and supportive community. So as you can see from the slide, 94% said that the speakers were very knowledgeable on the topic, and 95% said that the topic was very relevant to their work and that they have learned something new. And we are very happy to note that 99% said that the webinar was very useful. Now, when asked how they can apply their learnings from the webinar, we received a comment that says the process of reflection and recovery period is a very important consideration in dealing with trafficking in persons victims. In that way, we prosecutors can very well assess and ascertain the readiness and preparedness of the victims in participating in the proceeding and securing their full cooperation in prosecuting the case. So thank you, prosecutor, for that insightful comment. We appreciate it very much. And of course, one notable suggestion we received was for the speakers to speak clearly and slowly so we can better understand the discussion. So very well noted on that suggestion, and a kind reminder to myself and of course to our distinguished speakers today. We're very much value, of course, your comments and suggestions to improve our format and so we can better serve you. Now, having said that, we seek your indulgence to please complete the feedback survey for this webinar. The link is in the chat box. We will also send you a certificate of attendance for your records upon your completion of the survey. So just we will be posting this webinar link every now and then so that it will be easy for you to access this survey link. Now, to a more serious matter, the discussion today will revolve around trafficking in persons data. We are very excited to learn from our international and regional experts who will provide us some insights on how the ASEAN member states have approached national reporting of the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons obligations, as well as share their experiences in the collection, analysis, and reporting of TIP data. So we hope to be able to seek clarity on how human trafficking data advance victims' rights. So before we invite our esteemed speakers on the floor, we're very interested to listen to your thoughts on trafficking data. So may we invite participants to answer 3 poll questions. Be assured that the ASEAN-ACT will not use this poll data other than for this webinar discussion. Eve, can you kindly display on the screen, or Vicky, the poll questions? Now, for purposes of translation, I will read the questions aloud. Now, for poll question number 1, marking 5 years of the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, which of the following statistics is most important for victims of trafficking and counter-trafficking stakeholders to know? First option, number of successful international cooperation on victim identification and investigation. Second option, number of convictions against complicit government officials. Third option, number of victims compensated. Poll question number 2. What published information could best help a victim decide whether to give evidence in a trafficking case? Option 1, how many trafficking victims receive legal assistance? Option 2, how long it takes on average to conclude a TAP case in court? Option 3, how many trafficking victims receive compensation, restitution, or damages? And option 4, all of the above. Poll question number 3. Why is it important for counter-trafficking coordinating agencies to collect, analyze, and report disability disaggregated data? Option 1, breaks down legal and attitudinal barriers. Option 2, prevents discrimination against persons with disability. Option 3, because ASEAN member states are required to under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So please take a moment to respond to the poll questions. This will take only a minute of your time. And the poll questions will remain open for about 30 minutes. So you can take your time in answering them. All right. But we'll give you a minute. All right. I think our minutes is up. We will present the poll results after the presentation of the baseline report and reflections from our esteemed panelists. Okay. Now, this month, as mentioned by Councillor Daniel, is very significant to us as it marks the 5th anniversary of ASEAN Convention's Against Trafficking in Persons effectivity. And today is especially memorable because we're also officially launching the 2020 baseline report and its supplemental document, the TIP Data Toolkit. Our speaker will present the key findings and recommendations of this report to guide future policy development and collaboration in support of the convention's goals. So I have the honor to introduce our speaker author of this report and toolkit. She is the Director of Law and Development Partners and a Senior Advisor with the ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program and the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Justice 2. She has worked in the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, focusing on access to justice, human rights, and judicial reform. Her career spans working with international law firm Baker and McKenzie in Cairo, the UNRWA in Gaza Strip and Jerusalem, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra, and the International Development Law in their offices in Manila and in Sydney. Now, in 2019, she was awarded a Churchill Trust Fellowship to explore how private finance, philanthropic donors, and government can collaborate to provide free legal services for women and children through health justice partnerships. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker presenter, Ms. Kate Sumner. The floor is yours, Kate.
Thank you so much, Darlene. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening for me in Australia and afternoon for you. I'm deeply grateful for the introduction from DFAT, from Danielle, and I'm very grateful to the fellow panelists that we have here today. Bapak Andi Sansan from the Mahkamah Agung in Indonesia. Greetings to you, Bapak. Thank you for joining us today, and also to Prosecutor Ming Waden from Thailand. Thank you very much to both of you. And I'd like to say greetings to all the participants from across the ASEAN region and more widely who have joined this discussion today. It is, I believe, a really important discussion that we're having. I found it fascinating to put this baseline report together. And I hope by the end of this webinar, you will have gained something from it as well, and that we will sort of have a shared understanding of how we might work together over the next 8 years of the ASEAN-ACT. As everyone has mentioned in their introductions, the Convention Against Trafficking in Persons was signed in November 2015. And so what this baseline report does is it actually looks at the 5 years, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 2020, where national ASEAN countries have produced annual reports looking at trafficking in persons data. And so in 2021, last year, we reflected on that 5th year, on 2020. What could we see from 10 ASEAN countries in terms of how they were reporting against their convention responsibilities? And so really what this discussion today is about why trafficking in persons data, the collection, analysis, and publication is so important. Who's it important for? Why should we be doing this? And why is transparency of these national trafficking in persons annual reports so important? We are lucky to have 2 co-presenters from Indonesia and Thailand. As you will see, they have produced extraordinary trafficking in persons annual reports with a really high level and presentation of data. So I'm really looking forward to their reflections today as we go through this session. Data tells a story of what is happening, and I think that's what we have to keep in our minds. We're all coming from different agencies. We're in government, we're in civil society organizations. We may be working across literally hundreds of different organizations across the 10 ASEAN countries. But unless we understand some critical key trafficking in persons data from our country and from the 10 ASEAN countries, then how are we going to work together and really have a robust response to countering trafficking? That's the question that we're asking ourselves today. And I hope we sort of learn more as we go through this discussion. I'm sure I certainly will. ASEAN-ACT has committed to updating this report each year by looking at what the different ASEAN countries are reporting on each year. So our commitment as a program is to support the 10 ASEAN countries as they wish, in any way they wish, on this trafficking in persons data story and journey. This is just really to sum up what I've been saying. We had the convention signed in 2015. We have obligations of ASEAN countries, obviously, in signing up to that convention. Over the last couple of years, ASEAN-ACT as a program has been having conversations with each of the countries around what does a victim-sensitive approach actually look like? And we've formulated these 8 indicators of what a victim-sensitive approach might entail. And then I suppose where we're coming from is each country produces lots of data. You have lots of trafficking in persons data. We are not wanting you to collect any more, but we are wanting to see in the national annual reports that you present that maybe you frame or include these 22 trafficking in persons data indicators. And we're going to explain a little bit more about why we're seeking that. And really it's so that we can frame a story around the victim of trafficking and the information that they want to know. And we can see as agencies working in the counter-trafficking area, whether we are supporting and have a victim-sensitive approach. And lastly, obviously, the transparency of these national annual reports builds knowledge. It's been enormously interesting for me to see the different ways that the ASEAN countries report on their trafficking work. And I think as you know, you'll see, we've brought those approaches together in a partnership hub and made it easier for you to see all those trafficking reports. As we keep referring, and as you're going to hear from the UN Special Rapporteur a bit later, we are looking at data that has the victim at the heart of this trafficking set. What will they want to know? How are they being treated during this criminal justice process? In fact, how are they being treated from investigation through to rehabilitation and reintegration? And these are the very sort of straightforward things that a victim of trafficking would want to know if they were to participate in a trafficking case. All of you work in one way or another on counter-trafficking in your countries, and you understand the terrible stories of trauma that is inflicted by trafficking on victims of trafficking. And so by asking them to participate as witnesses in these cases, we know that there will be trauma involved in this process. And so we have a duty to provide a very a set of information by which they can evaluate whether they wish to contribute. Will they be supported during this process, this criminal justice process? Will they receive legal assistance? Will they receive compensation, restitution, or damages? How long, on average, does a trafficking in persons case take? What's the likely outcome for the trafficker in this process? Can I give my evidence early and by video? These are things that victims want to know. But often when we look at national trafficking reports, we are seeing a medley, a collage of different institutions' data, and we are not seeing the presentation of that data as a picture that makes sense to the victim of trafficking in terms of understanding whether they wish to participate. So just in summary of where we've come from, why is this important? ASEAN member states signed the convention. The national annual reports tell a story of how they're implementing those obligations. We have a range of government agencies and non-government agencies who are working to support victims across a whole range of legal, shelter, and other forms. How do they know how their work is contributing to better outcomes in combating trafficking in persons. We've spoken about why it's important for trafficking victims, and by extension, it's important for the national justice agencies who are seeking the participation of victims. So we have developed, as I say, these 22 data indicators. In fact, we've really selected them from information that countries are already collecting. And what we are really gathering here are case management information. We're gathering case outcome information in terms of outcomes for the victim, outcomes for the defendant. We are looking at victim disaggregated data. We're looking at victim types of assistance, and we're looking, including public complaint handling mechanisms for victims. And we're also looking at broader transparency questions. So that's sort of the range of issues that we're looking at. Coming to the heart of what the baseline report tells us, we've got 12 key points that emerge. 5 years into this, after the signing of the ACTIP, this is what we can see. We can see that 3 of the parties, ACTIP parties, published a Trafficking in Persons annual report, which contained data for 2020 in the following year, 2021. We can see that 2 of the ACTIP parties published what we call trend data, showing a pattern, showing what's happening over 3 to 5 years. Sometimes we get countries that just present a snapshot of that 1 year of the annual report. What we're really wanting as agencies in a country, whether we're NGOs or government agencies, is we want to see what's changing. We want to see over 3 to 5 years how the numbers are changing, how the patterns are changing. And ASEAN-ACT can help to work with any partner on this information. We have 5 really basic nuts and bolts case management data sets, which are police investigations, prosecutions, numbers of cases filed and finalized in courts. How long does a trafficking case take? How many of these cases are appealed? And we had 2 countries that published information on 4 of those 5 key data sets around case management in their annual report. We had 2 countries which were able to say how many trafficking in persons cases were finalized in a first instance court in 2020. And one of those countries could say what were the outcomes in those cases. So what happened in terms of conviction or non-conviction. Here we see that in none of the annual reports did it present information on whether a trafficking in persons victim received compensation, either from a national fund or as restitution damages from the trafficker. We had 2 countries that presented information on whether a victim would receive legal assistance. And this is, as we have seen when we're reflecting on what the victim wants to know, a really critical point. Early assistance, appropriate legal assistance, integrating with frontline agencies at the border, at points where trafficking in persons are picked up, integrating with health agencies, integrating with other first frontline agencies. We had 1 country that reported on whether a victim was able to present their evidence early through video. And we, through our 8 victim-sensitive indicators, have really been working with countries on why video testimony is so important, and that the taking of that video testimony early in order to reduce trauma for the victim. We then looked at different forms of victim disaggregated data, and we saw that 4 of the ACTIP parties could report on sex and age disaggregated data, but we had no ACTIP party that published data on whether a victim had a disability or impairment. Now, many of your countries, your statistical agencies use what we call the Washington Group short set questions on impairment, on disability, in their census and other survey work. So this is something we can talk more about and work with countries, and we'll hear more from the UN special rapporteur on trafficking in relation to this later in the afternoon. We had 2 countries who presented data on the investigations, prosecutions, and convictions of officials that were complicit in trafficking in persons. And finally, we have 1 country that publishes online anonymized trafficking court decisions that were finalized in 2020. And we're very fortunate today to have Bapak Andi with us, because it's the Supreme Court of Indonesia that has developed this decision database, and it allows for research and analysis into the trafficking cases that are finalized in a particular year, to evaluate, to look at those cases, to see what the outcomes were, how the victim was treated. This is what it looks like. This is the URL for the directory Putusan of the Mahkamah Agung. And we can see that it has been a huge effort of the Supreme Court. Almost 7 million cases are uploaded on this database. We've got 32,000 for the last month, almost 70,000. For the current month, 70,000 for the last month, and almost 270,000 for the last 3 months. It's a massive undertaking in transparency of decisions by the Indonesian government. It's been ongoing for many years, and it allows also in the trafficking in persons field a real next step in the level of transparency that we can see. We can see these decisions. The other thing that ASEAN-ACT has been working on and will continue to upload is on the Partnership Hub, we have put the annual reports, trafficking annual reports produced by different government agencies. It's a wonder, as I was doing this work towards the baseline report, I was looking for trafficking in persons national annual reports. We've now got them all in one place. We're going to work over time to have both the national language as well as any English translations. It's a very simple portal. You can filter, you check by year, you can check by country, you can check by agency, click search, and these come up. If any from your country are not there, please contact us, because we are tracking them down and wanting to continue to add to this partnership hub. So your help will be greatly appreciated. And as Darlene mentioned, as a side-by-side with this launch of the baseline report has been the launch of a toolkit on trafficking in persons data. It looks at each of these 22 trafficking in persons indicators. It provides an example from the ASEAN region of how this data is presented. We've also got some Google Excel documents so that we can present 5 years of trend data, and it produces charts from that. So there's a whole range of tools in this toolkit, but really we want this baseline report and the toolkit to stimulate a conversation with ASEAN-ACT. And we are really hoping that we can continue to work with the national coordinating agencies in each country, and continue to have one-on-one discussions country by country on how we can assist with this work towards improving transparency of trafficking in persons national reports. So with that, I would like to thank you for being part of this conversation today. It's very important for your institutions, I know, which is why you're spending this time here with us on Friday afternoon. But even more importantly, is it critical for the victims of trafficking and our duty to them under the ASEAN Convention to really deliver and be seen to deliver through national annual reports a victim-sensitive approach. Thank you very much, Darlene.
Thank you so much, Kate, for a very comprehensive presentation and simplifying what can be sometimes a complicated topic. I like what you said, that data tells a story, and by that story, we will be guided how to respond. So it is really very informative to look at the annual reports 5 years on from different countries with common obligations under the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons. Now, we are very fortunate to hear the reflections from two very distinguished experts from Indonesia and Thailand. May I introduce them first before we hear their reflections? We have with us today, His Honor, Dr. Haji Andi Samsan Nganro, Vice Chief Justice for Judicial Matter, Supreme Court of the Republic of Indonesia. Born in Wajo, South Sulawesi in January 2nd, 1953, His Honor was appointed as Justice of the Supreme Court in September 9, 2011, and currently serves as the Vice Chief Justice for Judicial Matter since February 15, 2021. He was previously a chairman of the Supervision Chamber of the Supreme Court, responsible for supervision matter. He has held several important positions, including Vice President of the Samarinda High Court, Appellate Judge at the Jakarta High Court and Medan High Court, President of the South Jakarta District Court, President of the Cibinong District Court, and President of the Tenggarong District Court. He obtained his Bachelor of Law degree in the University of Hasanuddin, Makassar, a holder of Master's degree of Law from the University of Krishnad Wipayana, and a Doctor's degree of Law holder from Padjadjaran University in Bandung. Also with us is an equally impressive public official from Thailand, Prosecutor Min Morin Sisiripon. He is a divisional public prosecutor for the Department of Trafficking in Persons Litigation from the Office of the Attorney General in Thailand. He is also a divisional public prosecutor at the Department of Strategic Planning and Database Management, which gathers and organizes the Trafficking in Persons database and other related information. He conducts campaigns, trainings, seminars, and other activities to promote knowledge and understanding the importance of anti-human trafficking. He is a graduate of a master's degree in international trade law and tax law from the University of Essex and Queen Mary University of London. Before joining the Department of Trafficking in Persons Litigation, he had served in Department of Civil Litigation and Department of Administrative Litigation. Currently, he is a member of a national subcommittee that is assigned to gather data and information for drafting prosecution part in Thailand's Trafficking in Persons Annual Report, and a member of Electronic Database System for Anti-Human Trafficking of the Office of the Attorney General. He is also a part of child-friendly prosecutor team that initiates and introduces friendly justice to juveniles, both victims and perpetrators. His Honor Andi Samsan and Pros Min Marin, given your vast experience on data collection and annual reports on trafficking in persons, may we hear your thoughts, reflections on the baseline report and toolkit, as well as share your country's good practices on data collection, transparency management, and of course, reporting of tip data. So ladies and gentlemen, please let us welcome His Honor Dr. Haji Andi Samsan Nganro and Prosecutor Min. We would like to invite His Honor Andi Samsan to take the floor first and share with us your reflection, to be followed by Prosecutor Min. I think you are on mute.
Ucapan terima kasih atas undangan ASEAN Australian counter trafficking pada Mahkamah Agung untuk menjadi penanggap.
Thank you for the invitation for us to basically be a speaker, not speaker in this webinar. And ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guest, first I'd like to basically forward apology from the president or chair of the Supreme Court, and as he is not able to attend, so he was asking me to basically be here as the vice chair in the judicial department of the Supreme Court to basically make the presentation in this webinar. And so the distinguished ladies and gentlemen, whether you are joining virtually or in persons, and best wishes to all of you. So Supreme Court admit and feel and have shared common goals, as well as the law enforcement agencies in the 10 countries, ACT, basically on ACT, and also the aim purpose of how to utilize data for law enforcers to ensure the fulfillment, the rights of the victims of trafficking. So the leadership in the Supreme Court, they want that every decision made by the Supreme Court should provide complete and satisfactory conclusion for all parties. And in terms of trafficking in persons, so what we want to see is the restoration of the recovery of the rights of the victims, not only that the case is concluded in the criminal court. So this is what we discussed quite often in Indonesia on how to implement the restorative justice principles. So in order to bring about the visions, the Supreme Court, of course, is not going to be able to do it on its own. So the data informations that we need, we try to manage at the Supreme Court. However, the other enforcement agencies also having their own, like in the police department, they're in the prosecutor's office, and also the victims and witnesses agency, they also have. So this is why we expect the greater, stronger cooperation among these relevant institutions under the leadership of the national coordinator in Indonesia. In this case, the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Children Protection, or we call it KPPA. So reading the report in the 2020 that was just presented, so Supreme Court really thanked in their contribution in the publication of the data indicators accordingly, case management data for TIP, and also the transparency of cases proceedings on the decisions. So today, at least there are three types of sources of information which we want to get a relevant data on TIP. And so one is the annual Supreme Court's report, and then information system, court information system, and then directory of the Supreme Court's decision. So given in the interest of the time, So I would like to take an example, the availability of the data on tips under the directory of the Supreme Court's decisions as follows. So total number of the decisions for all cases by 24th of March 2022 is 9,351. So these are all the decisions made by all courts in Indonesia decided from 2005 to 2022. So B. So in order that we could make decisions, there are different ways that you can use. One, you might want to use the case classification features. So by just clicking 3 times, you would be able to have 1,026 of the decisions of TIP cases decided from 2011 through 2020-22. This is all under the decisions directories. The second way how to do it, so you can get access to the collected data of the tip under the directory through searching using the keywords. For instance, when using the keywords perdagangan orang or trafficking in persons, and then the directory will show up with 1,099 cases of the trafficking in person. And this basically using the keywords in order that you can get access to the decisions based on which level of the court the cases are decided. And of course, every user can always, using a combined keywords, which you think is relevant whenever you would like to get access to the more specific documents. And about the 2022, the sensitive indicator for TIP, Supreme Court still feels that we need to improve in the availability of data and in different information systems that we have in the Supreme Court. For instance, right now is the directory of the decisions, for instance, is still not able to disaggregate the data, especially with the restitution for victims. But we could do it now with 168 decisions from 2018 to 2022. However, if you really want to get more specific data on the trafficking cases, how many victims received legal assistance, and also segregated by sex, or those having disabilities, then you have to download those decisions first, and then you have to do it manually in order to get this information. So that this deficiency, of course, you can improve it. The Supreme Court in this case, together with other law enforcement agencies or the public, the users of the directory. And for segregated data for victims, victim segregated data can probably be easily available if we already get the data available in the police department according to the 22 indicators required in a very simple way. And so if the data from the police level is already well managed, then at the court, things will be much easier. So in addition, from data from other institutions, the public, the user can also provide inputs on the classification or sub-classification on the trafficking cases in the directory. So such recommendation can be proposed using, like you just type in and then say QRIM or send, and it's actually available in the directory. So I think that is all I can share with you in a very brief presentation, and hopefully this is kind of enough thing for now or in terms of the availability of data in the Supreme Court and how to use it, and also the challenges as well as the opportunity for improvement. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Andy Samsan. Really noteworthy to learn that the Supreme Court ensures the restorative justice principles are applied on in the TIP cases or cases in general. So thank you for sharing with us the sources of data and how these are accessed. I think we have a lot to learn from the data collection system of the Indonesia Supreme Court, and of course, the areas where it could be improved on. So thank you again. And now maybe call on Prosecutor Ming Warin to share his reflection on the presentation.
And good afternoon, Your Honor, Vice Chief Justice, Dr. Andy Samson Nganro, Ms. Kate Sumner, Counselor Daniel Sever, ASEAN-ACT, and all participants. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you this afternoon on the baseline report 2020 that Ms. Kate Sumner has presented. First of all, I must say that I do admire this baseline report 2020 as it really reflects the great effort that the author has made, and it truthfully shows how ASEAN member states fulfill the obligations to active since the signing of the convention. All of the findings and recommendations have been researched thoroughly, including the 22 data key performance indicators. And as mentioned earlier, data and information are crucial to all stakeholders, whether they are victims, courts, government agencies, or non-agencies, to prevent and combat human trafficking or even to deter crimes. And let me share how do we collect data in Thailand. Okay, can you see my share screen? Okay. Because of transparency and victim-centric approach are our main goal of our Thailand annual report publication, we try to make every effort we can, as shown on the baseline report 2020, to gather all data and information from the very beginning until at the end of each case. And now please allow me to walk you through the process of our TIP data management, the database management. As shown on the screen, sorry that it is in Thai, and I'm sure that Ministry of Foreign Affairs have it translated officially in the annual report, but I cannot find the English version. So we have the electronic database system for anti-human trafficking, or EAT, managing by Ministry of Social Development and Social Security, which each of government agencies involving in anti-TIP, such as Royal Thai Police, Office of the Attorney General in Thailand, Court of Justice, can access. However, each of the agencies can access and input only the data they're responsible. After the data is submitted, editing is possible when the system administrator permits. For example, before police before a police submits a tip case to Office of the Attorney General, he or she has to fill in all required data in the EAT, and likewise when we file cases to court. We also have the data on how many complicit officials were involved in human trafficking and the result of each case. And this EAT system automatically compiles and reports daily. And let's see, as you can see on my screen, we have the map of Thailand here. And the pink area is the area where the location of crime scene occurred. And the number 63 is the real-time case at this moment that the trafficking case has happened. And we also have the number of victims here. This is the number of the victim under the protection of MSDHS. And the right one here is the type of exploitation. And the graph here is the location where the crime scene happened in all of the country. And if I click one of the pink area here, it will show that which province that the crime scene happens. Or this is the Loy province in our northeastern. Or this is here, pink area here. It takes time to load to download. Sorry, but the pink area will show which province the crime scene happens and how many numbers of the victim and which location the crime scene occur and what type of exploitation has occurred. So this is our EAT. This is our EAT system in a nutshell. And the EAT system automatically compiles and reports daily, as I mentioned, and for the governing body that supervise the EAT system, the supervising committees, they meet on annually basis and the subcommittee on quarterly basis. And by this means, we have all traceable data and information. And currently, our MSDHS, the ministry, is studying to develop the electronic database system for human trafficking prevention in order to cover all 3 Ps: prosecution, protection, and prevention. Because the system here I show you on the screen is only the prosecution and protection, not prevention. So, and I would like to point out that the baseline report, back to the baseline report, sorry, that there is one interesting KPI that particularly the compensation or damages received by victim, as none of the active members publish the data on the percentage of tip cases. It might be the case that there was no compensation as the defendants did not compensate the victims. And most of the time, their financial status is as the same as the victims, or their properties can hardly be traced. This is also the problem in Thailand, that we are in the process of amending the law to make anti-human trafficking fund under the supervision of MSDHS available to victims in form of monetary compensation, not only in form of the shelter support during or before the court trial. And one thing I almost forget to mention is the benefit of having complete tip data, as it enables us, especially my department, to effectively organize and conduct seminars and trainings to prosecutors. And most of the time has been sponsored by ASEAN-ACT. Thank you very much. And the events that we conduct, it is response to the emerging crime patterns, and it also helps police to understand modus operandi of criminal and trend of crimes. So I hope what I have mentioned before shows the importance of having defense data collection, really promotes victim protection, efficacy, as well as transparency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prosecutor Min. The report was indeed very well thought of, so thank you for your generous words. I'm very glad that you mentioned about transparency, that it is very important, and I think it is very well manifested in the slide that you presented. Very interesting to hear the experiences from you and also from His Honor Andy Samsan. Both of your sharing has provided us some light on and also confirms what Kate has mentioned, that collecting data need not really be that complicated as long as you have a good system. Now, we also have so much to learn from each other. And before that, we would like to go back now to our polls and check the results. May we request Vicky to present the results? There you go. Okay. So allow me to read for purposes again for translation. Number one question, marking 5 years of ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Person. Which of the following statistics is most important for victims of trafficking and counter-trafficking stakeholders to know? From the options 1, 2, and 3, it appears that the first option garnered 62% number of successful international cooperation on victim identification and investigation, followed by option number 3 at 27%, number of trafficking victims compensated, and then the second option garnered 11% at number of convictions against complicit government officials. All right. Before we proceed to answering question number 2, reacting to question number 2 and question number 3, may I invite Kate Sumner to provide her comments or reactions to the poll results on question number 1?
Yes, thank you very much, Darlene. It's fascinating. I'm, of course, skipping through to what is happening on the other ones as well. But it's fascinating to get people's views on what they see as really important in terms of data that comes through for the victim. I can certainly understand that the most of the people listening today have said that successful international cooperation on victim identification and investigation is something that they think is really important. I think it really goes to the heart of the ACT. It goes to the heart of all the institutions, as Prosecutor Ming Warin mentioned, and also His Honor Bapa Andi, that this is really a collaboration between the investigating arm, the prosecution arm, and the court arm, supported by all of these social services. But unless we have these investigations that are successful, unless we are locating and identifying victims and prosecuting, then the whole reason for the ACTIP, is not being seen in a day-to-day way. So I think I support where everyone is coming from on that. I do have also support, of course, for the other 2 points. I think it is important that countries are transparent about the role that their own officials can sometimes unfortunately play in relation to trafficking in persons. And the only way that a country moves forward is by making that information clear and being very transparent about what the prosecution, what happens in relation to those cases. And we've got really good examples of that in some of the national reports. And clearly this question around compensation, Prosecutor Ming really referred to that in terms of what is underway in Thailand in terms of the compensation fund and victim support. LPSK in Indonesia is also another really good example of where you've got a strong institution working with victims in relation to compensation. So thank you very much. And, you know, to the poll team in bringing this data to us, it lets us sort of really reflect on some of these points really well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, for your very detailed reflection, reaction to each of the options that was shared. And we thank also our participants for responding. Now, and may we now proceed to number 2 question. What published information could best help a victim decide whether to give evidence in a trafficking case? First option garnered only 10%. How many trafficking victims received legal assistance? And then followed by the second option, which garnered only 2%. How long it takes on average to conclude a tip case in court? And the third option gathered only 8%, which is how many trafficking victims receive compensation, restitution, or damages. So it appears that the fourth option garnered around 80%, which says that all of these first 3 options are very important and could help victim decide whether to give evidence in a TIP case. Now, may we invite His Honor Andy Samsan to give his reflection. I'm sorry, my mistake. May I invite Prosecutor Min to give his reaction reflection to the results on question number 2.
Thank you, Darlene. I'm very surprised that I see many polls on the last one, the last answer. As yeah, this question really has no one correct answer, because it's all of the above. And from what I experienced, there are many factors that victims may take in their consideration when deciding to give evidence or to testify in court. And certainly they need legal assistance. They want to know, would they actually receive compensation? They also need to know how long the proceeding will be. And there were many tip cases in Thailand during the early stage of COVID-19 that the court had to adjourn the case for a long period of time. And victims decided to flee because they could not live their normal lives when the cases were not concluded. So one key information that I would add is how long the sentence will be, and maybe the other one is, will the traffickers really be convicted? As there is concern about the victims' safety, including their family safety, after testifying against the defendants in court. So the victims must also be ensured that after the case is concluded, they can live normally and peacefully without being threatened from the perpetrators or defendants. So this is my comment to the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prosecutor Min. I also agree with you that yes, all of these are important, and I think that is what our participant feels as well. But thank you for the detailed sharing also in each of these options. Now, on the last question, why is it important to counter trafficking coordinating agencies to collect, analyze, and report disability disaggregated data? So from the options, we've seen that the first option garnered the highest at 47%. It breaks down legal and attitudinal barriers, followed by the third option at 28%, because the ASEAN member states are required to under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the last garnered only 25% is the second option, which says prevents discrimination against person with disability. May I now invite His Honor Andy Samsan to provide his reaction, comments on the results. You are on mute, Your Honor.
Baik.
Well,
Mengapa bisa dengar suara saya? Mengapa penting bagi Badan Koordinasi Penanggulangan?
so why is it important for counter-trafficking coordinating agencies to collect, analyze, and report disability disaggregated data? Of course, this will help to prevent discrimination, and it's good. And number two, whether in this case, I'll take Indonesia, for instance, when there is a trafficking in persons case, and if we can identify your victims with disabilities, but in our case, we don't have it. So basically, why this is important? Using that example, this is important to have disaggregated data. And number two, AMS is required. In terms of the rights of the disabilities, persons with disabilities. So this is also important. So this is why we need to have a data, analyze, and report the data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor, Andy Samsan. Yes, all of these are actually really important. All of these are important. We also appreciate our participants for sharing their thoughts as to which for them is more important. But I do agree that all of these are important for our counter-trafficking agencies to collect and analyze disability disaggregated data. Again, thank you to all our panelists for their reactions on the poll results. These are all very well noted. And now let us proceed to our second part of the session, which is listening to the most awaited video of our United Nations Special Rapporteur for Trafficking in Persons, Professor Chauvin Malali. May I request Vicky or Eve to play the video? Thank you. Professor Chauvin, can you tell us what are the current gaps in the implementation of counter-trafficking efforts in relation to the rights of persons with disability?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for the opportunity to raise these concerns. There are very significant gaps currently in planning and programming to counter trafficking, specifically in relation to ensuring that we are preventing trafficking of persons with disabilities and children with disabilities. So, for example, children in institutional settings or persons with disabilities who are dependent on a caregiver may be particularly vulnerable to exploitation. But because of the lack of awareness of risks of trafficking and lack of access to information for people with disabilities in accessible formats, we are not really being effective in our prevention actions. So many anti-trafficking action plans at domestic level don't include specific attention to ensuring that information is accessible to persons with disabilities, that legal assistance is accessible, that the appropriate procedural accommodations have been made, and that safe accommodation and shelter is available to persons with disabilities who may also be victims of trafficking. So there are multiple areas where we really have significant gaps. Also within the criminal justice system, for victims and survivors of trafficking, we need to ensure that accommodations have been made so that they can participate fully in legal proceedings, and that they are accommodated in doing that. But I think the critical message really is to think about prevention. In all of our information awareness campaigns, in our programming, are we ensuring that we are thinking about specific risks that may be faced by adults and children with disabilities? And we need to listen to them and ensure that they are participating in the planning and design of prevention actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shovan. That was really, really very important, as you've mentioned. So I'll proceed now to ask the second question. Professor Shovan Malali, how is this trafficking in persons disaggregated data important for your work as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking in your engagement with national governments?
Disaggregated data is hugely important to my work, particularly highlighting persons with disabilities who may have been identified as victims of trafficking or at risk of trafficking. Without that disaggregated data, we don't have a strong enough evidence base to inform the actions of governments, to advise them on how best to plan, to program to combat trafficking in persons. And breaking down that data by gender and disability, age and disability, race and ethnicity and disability, all of that gives us the information and the evidence that we need so that we can really target the prevention actions and ensure that we are not missing groups of people who may be in particularly vulnerable situations, and also ensuring that our assistance and protection is reaching those who are most at risk, and that we have that information, that we have that profile, and critically, of course, to enable governments to target resources, financial resources, to support those who are working with people with disabilities and children with disabilities, for example, to ensure that there is effective prevention action in relation to trafficking in persons, and to ensure that the appropriate accommodations are made in providing assistance. So that disaggregated data is really important in giving us that evidence base and being able to plan and really program our actions. And that, I think, really will ensure that we are more effective in doing what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Shovan. This will definitely give a lot of our panelists and, of course, participants to think about and discuss for the webinar. All right, thank you so much, Vicky. There you go, a very thought-provoking answers or responses from our very own United Nations Special Rapporteur, Professor Shovan Malali. Now, we would like to invite our panelists again to share their thoughts on what Professor Shovan mentioned. Can we call on this time, maybe we can do a reverse invitation to take the floor. May we now invite first His Honor, Dr. Andy Sampson, to give his reflection.
Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Coba memberi tanggapan
I try to respond
atas video Profesor
to the video, Professor Shovan
Gali.
Mulali.
Mahkamah Agung Indonesia
Supreme Court,
telah memiliki
Indonesian Supreme Court
kebijakan
has policies, some policies
dan akomodasi yang layak
to
bagi penyandang
bring about
disabilitas
adequate,
secara
appropriate accommodation, especially for victims with disabilities at court. So this kind of accommodation by the Supreme Court is defined not only by the availability, the accessibility, physical, for the persons with disabilities, but also we try to make sure the accessibility of rights and also to the court procedures, and also specially needed services for persons with disabilities. Of course, it is suited to the challenges and the barriers that they actually facing. So in order that we could provide decent, appropriate accommodation, the court needs to be able to identify what accesses are needed by those that have to be in the proceedings, including the victims in trafficking in persons cases. This is why the two policies that I mentioned, which is right now being formulated by the Supreme Court. So this is basically, the idea is to provide equal access to the persons with disabilities at court. So one policy is the decision letter by the DG, Director General of the General Justice, number, so this is a 2020, and also the Religious Justice Court decision in 2021. So basically, they're introducing a very critical, important mechanisms on what is called self-assessment. So having this mechanism, and in the process of filing or registering the case with the court, the prosecutors will be asked few questions, basically to find out whether the parties in the cases are having disabilities. So the questions in the self-assessment that is introduced by these two policies are basically adopting in general the questions in the Washington group questions, plus other questions on the fulfillment of the rights of parties in the material principles. So, but we haven't checked further about the implementation of these two policies, because they're still very young in age, only 1 year. But I do hope, if we do meet again in the next discussion, Supreme Court I wish that we will be able to share with you the benefits of this having these policies for the persons with disabilities at court. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor, Andy Samsan. We would love to have you again. And thank you for sharing the perspective of the courts on the issue on disability. And I like the idea of self-assessment. And we, of course, look forward to hearing more maybe when we meet again on this subject matter. Now, maybe I also invite the prosecutor, Ninwarin, to also share your thoughts.
Can you hear me or?
Yes.
Sorry, I cannot find my the microphone menu. I have to temporarily on the space bar. Maybe the admin, could you please ask me to unmute again?
We can hear you. Oh no, now you're unmute. Okay, we can.
Okay. Really sorry. So,
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I thank you, ASEAN-ACT and Dr. Shelban Malali and Ms. Kate Sumner, that you have raised the awareness of having including people with disabilities in the annual report. I do really appreciate. because personally I find that the KPI number 16 from the first presentation, the disability disaggregated data seems to be mostly neglected by the annual report, and none of any country have reported this data. And in reality, there were many cases that people with disabilities were exploited in human trafficking cases. And from my experience, what I saw is one of cases in Thailand was a child with mental disability was sexually exploited by child's relatives. But we only collect the data in form of age and sex and type of exploitation, not the type of disability. So the baseline report with together with the answers from Professor Hiobandari signify this necessity that we should rapidly fill the gap by including disability disaggregated data in every of our annual report for the rights of people with disabilities, to give them the knowledge and in not only in form of protection, but in form of prevention, in order to maintain transparency and also inclusive society. So this is my comment on the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prosecutor Ming Marin. We are on the same page, and I agree with you on including in all of our reports disaggregated data on disability. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. And now, but our last but certainly not the least, may we hear from Kate?
Thank you so much, Darlene. And thank you very much to Dr. Bapa Andi and Prosecutor Ming Warin for your comments. I find that video from Dr. Siobhan Mulali so refreshing, as I did her comments in 2020, where she really raised the idea that the trafficking, counter-trafficking domain and our conversations were missing this data set around people with disability. And she is so articulate in terms of identifying this data gap of, are we missing the story? Are we missing the picture? Are we not seeing the special risks that Prosecutor Ming has identified for people with disability? And if you intersect disability with being a child, it's, you know, you're going to get some real vulnerability, which is not going to play out very well in the criminal justice system unless that disability is identified. And as Dr. Mulali is talking about, whether there's suitable accommodations. I think we had a wonderful presentation last year, ASEAN-ACT, around the non-punishment principle. And Dr. Mulali at that stage also identified this compounding risk that a person with a disability may not be identified as a person with a disability because the questions aren't asked about whether they have different impairments, whether they need particular support. But because of the disability, they will be less likely to explain what is happening and are more likely, therefore, to be criminally prosecuted rather than protected under the provisions of the Act. So I think there's a whole lot of issues at play here, and we really have a lot to thank the Special Rapporteur for in terms of her identification of this issue and indeed, obviously, her willingness to participate and with you, Darlene, and answer those questions. I'm really interested by the comments of Bapak Dr. Andi in relation to the letters, the documents, the practice directions issued by the general courts and the religious courts in relation to disability, and the use of the Washington Group questions in each of these cases. will really go a long way to identifying people with disability. And so I think this part of the conversation is very exciting because we're seeing new developments in Indonesia in terms of the way these cases are handled, that each person is going to be asked around disability. And from hearing from Prosecutor Ming, we're also getting this really exciting potential in Thailand as well. Can we begin to integrate this disability dimension as well as sex, gender, age as well? So thank you so much, Darlene.
Thank you, Kate, and of course, all of your sharing and all of your thoughts, reactions, and perspectives have definitely provided us more information and to what Professor Chauvin was emphasizing in her responses, which is really on the prevention of trafficking of persons with disability, and having the value of having a strong evidence base to help plan the programs and to enable resources. So thank you again, everyone, for all your thoughts and sharing. Now, let us now move on to the most equally exciting part, which is the question and answers from our viewers or participants. We do have one participant who sent in a pre-recorded question. Anyone can answer the pre-recorded questions. It is not directed to any particular speaker, but we also have some questions on in the Q&A box and chat box with very specific requests to a speaker to respond. But before reading the questions in the chat box and Q&A box, may we request Vicky or Eve to play the pre-recorded question from a participant?
Good morning. I would like to ask on how can we address the challenges in data management and data collection to ensure the seamless collection from the local government units up to the national level and cascading of the same data from the national up to the local government.
All right. Who would want to respond? I would just...
So may I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is the problem that occurs before we have the national system, because every data is collected manually and it is not linked together between agencies. So the ASEAN-ACT, the system that I presented to all of you before, really solves the problem that before the police or any agencies transfer the case, they have to submit all the required data. Otherwise, they cannot proceed and file the case or transfer the case to the higher agency. Like I have said before, that police have to fill in the data of sex, the age, and every aspect that we need to collect. So they have to submit, and they have to submit the data, and then they can proceed to the next level or something like that. And I think the national, so that the answer to this question might be, you have to have the national level that force everyone to require everyone to fill in the data before they can proceed. So this might answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prosming. What you have demonstrated with your example is that it's not impossible. It is doable. So it might take quite some time, but it certainly is doable. So thank you very much for sharing your example. And I hope that indeed answered the question from our participant. And I think she has one more question. She's actually a social worker or social welfare officer in the Philippines and has been dealing with DIP cases and traffic victims. So we'll play one more video from her.
Good morning. May I ask if would there be a recommendation to standardize the data collection and the data collected from the region as well as from the countries and the local government units? And if yes, what could be the standard data that can we request from the stakeholders to ensure that we are collecting the quality data that we can use to improve the anti-trafficking in persons advocacy and campaign at all levels? Thank you.
All right, there you go. And I think, although I don't want to request, but I think that's for Kate. Would you like to take that, Kate?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. I think it is really another way of asking the first question in a way, which Prosecutor Ming answered so well. But I think my answer would go to some of the points that we've been hearing from the two panelists all the way through today, which is this need to have real collaboration between the investigation, prosecution, and courts, as well as a whole range of government and non-government agencies that are providing the support structures for victims of trafficking all the way through this process. And I really like listening to Prosecutor Ming when he said earlier, well, we come together, or the subcommittee of the coordinating body comes together quarterly and is looking at all of this data. And I particularly liked what he said in his last response, which is we are forcing the data to be brought. I think there's a little bit of pushing happening here, but that quarterly reflection, that quarterly analysis of data, I think is really important, because you are lost if at the end of the year you're trying to bring together data sets. It's too much, it's too long. And so I think in a way, every country is very clear on, in our interactions, we've seen pretty good collection by different agencies of the key data. It's how is that shared? How is that discussed between different agencies? And how is it published in a summary format so that a whole range of agencies in the country, as well as victims of trafficking and the civil society organizations support them, can really see that? And so I suppose that would be my answer to this, is whether you're working at a district level, at a provincial level, at a national level, having this link to the Trafficking in Persons Task Force and their quarterly reflections on data. And as we've seen from Thailand, having that live data, that's an extraordinary facility. And it's really showing at a national level who is reporting and who is not. Because of course, those at the national level are looking at those pink areas and they're saying, well, we often have trafficking in these other areas. Where is the data? So it leads to this conversation around inputting data and quality of data, as well as then every quarter you've got good data to be having a conversation on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And we'll take note of that. And I like what you said, that even from the very beginning, you've been emphasizing that the data is already there. It's just how it is shared, how is it discussed, how it is published, and of course, excellent example from shared by Pros Ming Marine, the live sharing of the data, and of course, identifying who will be responsible, who will be doing the forcing, quote unquote, and of course, I think political will is also very, very important. So thank you so much for your sharing. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ken, to proceed and read the questions in the chat box or Q&A box.
Thank you so much.
We have 20 minutes, I think. No, 15 minutes. Okay, thank you, Ken.
Right. Yes, I think we can cover it a few minutes with the following questions. I am only here so that we can give our Madam Moderator a few minutes to breathe while we prepare for the closing of the webinar. And thank you so much, Kate, Pak Andy, and Prosecutor Ming for the wonderful sharing of information on data and your experiences as well on the ground. I'll give this first question to Prosecutor Ming, and then Kate can also provide the answer. And the question from Nuridha Winning Sari. Norita says, most of the time, the victims of trafficking also experience other types of gender-based violence. How is the process of sorting data for the crimes, for the victims who experience several types of gender-based violence? And how does this affect victims' access to their rights? Can you start the response, Prosecutor Ming, please?
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand the question clearly, but what I understand, and you can correct me, but what I understand is that if there is many types of violence or like many types of exploitation occur in one victim, how do they classify? Am I correct or not?
Yep, Prosecutor Ming, I think the question is asking us how sorting of data for the victims who experience, yes, several types of gender-based violence helps them access their rights.
Oh, this is actually very hard question to answer. I'm not sure that I can answer this question because maybe this is I never faced this problem in Thailand particularly, but for the gender-based problem, we in terms of protection, we now have the shelter for the LGBTQI for the government, the government supervising this shelter. And for the question, I'm sorry that I have no experience to answer this question. Maybe Ms. Kate, could you help?
Yes,
out?
Please, Kate.
Absolutely. Prosecutor Ming, you have come to my help before. I would be very happy to answer this question. I'm sure you have dealt with questions like this. It's just maybe the way the question is framed. I think what we're seeing here is something that the Special Rapporteur for Human Trafficking was talking about when she's speaking about intersection of different types of vulnerability, whether it be disability, sex, gender, being child or an adult, as well as different ethnic backgrounds as well. But this question is looking at the compounding of violence in a victim's life, and that may have started very young. In fact, the example that Prosecutor Ming gave to us was of a child who had an intellectual disability and had this sexual assault, sexual exploitation. And probably what we're seeing there is a level of violence that may have been perpetrated within the family or without. And the trafficking is just the latest form of violence that person is experiencing. And so by collecting this data, looking at disaggregated data around the victim, we're better able to provide support services to the victim. And in particular, we're looking at legal advice services, which will not only be able to help with the trafficking case, but potentially with some of the other levels of violence that the person has experienced. And also this sort of what we call the wraparound care of health and counseling supports. So by understanding the victim better in terms of the sorts of questions and the sorts of information that we ask them that they disclose, we're better able to support them through the trafficking process, but also more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. And we also have well, more of a statement rather than a question. And I think just to give the floor back to Prosecutor Ming, if you can give your reaction, Prosecutor. One of our participants, Sinta, states that she says that we need more research to build the evidence base and help victims. Can you give us your reaction, please, Prosecutor?
Could you repeat the question again? Because I am reading the other one on the chat box. So sorry.
Yes, it's a statement. She says, saying that we need more research to build the evidence base and help victims.
Sure. This is a very strong statement that we really need the research base. And for me, I'm not offending anyone, but our frontline officers still lack the knowledge to building the case, and it might be hard for them to gather all of the evidence, or it is quite hard for them to identify who is or who are not victims. And I'm not sure this is the right answer to the question, as Kate is really curious to my answer. I'm sorry.
I think you did well, Prosecutor Ming. Yes, highlighting the need for this data. There is no wrong answers to these types of questions. Shall we ask the final question to Bapak Andy? Bapak Andy Samsan, may we please ask you this final question from our participant, Nukila. Nukila is asking, how does the Supreme Court address the importance of trafficking case data, starting from the district court, then appeal to the High Court and cassation decisions in the context of trafficking in persons, including case data that resulted in child victims, which was also carried out for evaluation of judges' work with child case certification, Your Honor.
Saya coba menjawab.
I try to answer. In terms of data system in a Supreme Court, it's integrated in every stage of examinations, from the first level of court to the higher court, and then in Supreme Court. Through this data, we can monitor through SIPP. This is kind of a system for information tracing, case information tracing. So basically, whoever wants to know about the data, they can access, and so they can trace as well. So this is quite informative in this kind of situation. So that is number one. Number two, how to deal with this case once the case is there, based on the observation, because I also attended some kind of proceedings. Often the cases using litigation function usually in the first level of court, usually not finalized. It doesn't matter, like the prosecutors or the defendants, they always try to appeal to higher court or cassation. So almost every case of the trafficking case, they usually seek proceedings until the cassation. So what I wanted to say is all the cases are well monitored. because we have the data available.
Berdasarkan data yang ada,
And having this data at the first level court, the appeal, the cassation or Supreme Court, so that everyone basically can input and access the data. So it shows transparency, and everyone, in this case, like prosecutors, defendants, they could use the legal avenues, or through, maybe they can access this data through internet. So I think that is my brief explanation on how we administer the proceedings at court in terms of trafficking in persons case to the Supreme Court. So basically, it's almost none finalized in the first court. So this is why we need to pay attention to this kind of a system, and especially victims, child, they promised a work, they were employed, but then they would be exploited, for instance, and it becomes a crime. And so we should be able to monitor this, and then we got this information at the first level court, and then we will follow the information in the second and then the highest court. So that is my response. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Honor Pak Andi Samsan, for the great response. Thank you to Kate and Prosecutor Ming. You have been very gracious in answering and providing us your thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, our dear participants, since we have very limited time, we know that you have propounded us with some questions over at the chat box. We're interested to discuss further, but for now, we thank you for your questions. We hope we could discuss this some more, maybe in our partnership hub on the ASEAN-ACT website. And we're going to post the recording of this webinar also in the website. So thanks, everyone. And thank you also for the great questions. We're going to collect all the questions that we will gather here, and maybe Kate and also Prosecutor Ming and Bapak Andy will be able to respond to them in some other ways. For now, I give the floor back to our Madam Moderator, Darlene.
Thank you, Cam, and of course, thank you to our expert panelists for answering the questions. I also noticed that Prosecutor Ming Marin also responded to the questions posted in the chat box. So same with Kate, if you would want to respond to some of the questions, but as Cam has already mentioned, we will respond to your queries, and this will be posted in our portal. Now, again, for a last sharing or a last thought, we would like to invite again all our panelists to share any last message that they would like our attendees to remember, or our participants to remember. It could be a call for action or a recommendation, or even just posting a question for participants to think about when they leave the webinar. So I would like to give the floor to Kate, and then followed by His Honor, Dr. Andi Samsan, and then followed by Prosecutor Ming Marin. Kate, please.
Thank you very much, Darlene. I think We have traveled a long way in this last 2 hours, indeed. I thank Papa Andy for his initial comment at the very beginning. How do we utilize data to ensure the fulfillment of victim rights? I'm also very grateful to Prosecutor Ming Warin for his many comments during this session. It's particularly interesting with Thailand looking at the compensation fund for victims, as well as this sort of willingness to look at questions around disability, which we're also seeing in Indonesia. I think with the Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking, we really saw that there are very significant gaps in the data that we're able to see. Today, we're looking at a baseline report. And that means that we're looking at a snapshot, a picture of what ASEAN countries present in 2020, 5 years after ACT was signed. And so really, I just want to highlight that this is the very beginning of a journey. We have the baseline. ASEAN-ACT is here as a partner to work with countries and to learn really from many of the countries as they've gone about this data journey, how we can support any of the countries in ASEAN who would like that support over the coming years. So thank you very much, Darlene, and thank you to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Kate. May I now invite His Honor, Dr. Andy Samsan.
Untuk lebih ditingkatkan lagi.
I think we need to improve the decision-making process to be more progressive, transparent, and consistent. And of course, we want to be able to help the victims of trafficking in persons in terms of the collection, analyzing, and reporting of data of trafficking in persons cases. Management of data is very crucial. Without having this data, it's going to be very difficult to know the case of trafficking in person, especially when it is affecting the persons with disabilities. Hopefully, in the future, we can always use this data evidence-based. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Honor Andy Samsan. And now maybe invite Prosecutor Min Marin.
Okay. For me, I cannot stress enough the importance of having solid trafficking in persons annual reports, as it shows transparency and the commitment of each country in combating human trafficking. And I hope that today's webinar encourage all participants and the active members to collaborate and fulfill the active goals. Thank you very much to our fellow panelists and our distinguished participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prosecutor Ming Marin. Excellent advice from all of you. And I think the common denominator that has been emphasized today is that the data is very important or fundamental for counter-trafficking efforts to work and for further improvement. And I hope that the discussion today have provided everyone in the room some guidance and answers to any burning questions or thoughts that you may have entering into this webinar. So this has been such a rich discussion, and to summarize and draw the key points, may I invite our ASEAN-ACT team leader, Dr. Lucia Pietropaoli, to do a recap. Dr. Lucia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Darlene, and thank you so much to all of our distinguished speakers. Many of you would have heard the phrase, what gets measured gets done. And I think that phrase is extremely apt as we discuss what ASEAN member states currently collect, analyse and publish in relation to trafficking in persons data. I think all of our speakers today have emphasised that to improve and move forward with our counter-trafficking in persons responses, we first need to understand the problem, unpack the problem and understand not just what it is, but why it persists despite many, many attempts to fix this very complex problem. Kate Summer, thank you so much for your presentation and for your research on this report commissioned by ASEAN-ACT. You emphasised the very important point that data tells a story and that we need trend data over time, not just data, which is a point in time. I think you also emphasised to us that data is critical for all branches of government in making decisions, for the judiciary, for the bureaucracy, for the executive in changing law. Data is needed as the evidence base for better law, better policy and better practice to counter trafficking in persons. And of course, most importantly, you emphasise that victims of trafficking themselves need data to make decisions about their own personal futures. They need data and critical information about things such as how long a trafficking trial takes, whether they will be compensated, whether they can testify via video. They need this information to make a critical decision about whether to participate in criminal justice proceedings. If we have the data over time, if it's public and accessible, we are more likely to get victims who are willing and able to participate in criminal justice processes to counter trafficking. I would also very much like to thank Wakil Ketua Mahkamah Agung RI. Thank you so much, Bapak, Dr. Andi Samsang, for your insightful remarks about how Indonesia, particularly the Mahkamah Agung or the Supreme Court, has built a very systematic and strong system for publishing all court decisions, not only those around trafficking, but all court decisions of the Supreme Court. This is extremely important for victims and justice seekers to be able to see in a transparent and open way how judges are making decisions and interpreting the law in Indonesia. It's also extremely important for policymakers and civil society advocates to be able to access these decisions free and accessibly online using various different search functions and using the full range of technology that we have available to us. Thank you so much also, Bapak, for highlighting that there is room for improvement. It really shows leadership from the Mahkamah Agung, from the Supreme Court, that the Indonesian Supreme Court acknowledges that this is a start and there is further to go in terms of refining that system and achieving greater transparency and accountability in your justice system. And finally, to Prosecutor Tan Min, thank you so much for actually showing us visibly what Thailand's extremely good system looks like for capturing trafficking in persons data. As you said, and as Kate pointed out, we cannot start collecting data a week before an annual trafficking report is due. A data infrastructure needs to be established and a system needs to be used throughout the year to ensure that we are collecting data in a consistent and a systematic way. As we've spoken about through this webinar, we are not intending to add more work to anybody's job. Much of this data is already collected, but it's about collecting data in a systematized way. It's about sharing it with the agencies that need to know and about publishing a credible and consistent and relevant set of data and information for the public and for policymakers to see over a longer period. So it was extremely useful to see how Thailand is collecting data across the provinces as well, and that importance of the national perspective and highlighting the differences between centre and various different provinces in Thailand, as well as the differences between the provinces themselves. All of this is helping to build that data picture that, of course, informs our understanding of trafficking. And finally, of course, a very powerful message from the Special Rapporteur for Trafficking in Persons. Professor Mulali reminded us that persons living with disability are particularly vulnerable to trafficking in persons, especially those living in institutional settings and especially those with intellectual impairment who are particularly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. We need to raise awareness about the risks of trafficking, particularly for those vulnerable groups. She also reminded us that persons with disability, if they become victims of trafficking, need particular support and protection as they move through the service system and the criminal justice system. They need reasonable adjustments, and staff and frontliners and everyone that interacts with victims with disability need to ensure that their approach is disability inclusive and sensitive. So an incredibly powerful message and call to action from the Special Rapporteur. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say thank you again to all of our distinguished panelists and also to all participants for your excellent questions. I think it's been a really rich discussion, as Darlene said, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to further the collection, analysis and publication of data across this region and to furthering a transparency agenda which actually increases access to justice, especially for victims of trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lucia. Brief but very concise summary. Not an easy feat. Not an easy feat, but you could not have done it better. You have captured all the key points shared by our experts. Now, given the important role of senior officials meeting on transnational crime, voluntary lead shepherd to trafficking persons in the implementation of the ACT, we're very honored to have the pre-recorded message of a distinguished gentleman representing SOMTC voluntary lead shepherd to officially close the program. He is the Assistant Secretary for International Relations and other interior sector concerns of the Philippine Department of Interior and Local Government. We would play the video now of Honorable Marcelo C. Morales.
Thank you, Dr. Lucia Petra Pauli, the team leader of ASEAN-ACT, Ms. Kate Sumner, Senior Advisor of ASEAN-ACT, Honorable Andy Samsan Ngangro, Vice Chief Justice on Judicial Matter, Supreme Court, Jakarta, Indonesia, Prosecutor Mingwarin Siripong, Divisional Public Prosecutor, Department of Trafficking in Persons Litigation, Office of the Attorney General, Thailand, distinguished participants from the ASEAN member states, esteemed colleagues from the Australian Mission to ASEAN and Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon to everyone. It is with great honor to be with you virtually today in closing this inspiring webinar that walk us through on what we have done since the signing of the ASEAN Convention against trafficking in persons, especially women and children, or ACT, came into force in 2015. On behalf of the SOMTC Philippines and being the ASEAN SOMTC lead shepherd on trafficking in persons, I would like to sincerely express my profound appreciation to the Australian government, especially through the ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, for your continued support and partnership with ASEAN to further improve justice responses to trafficking and advance the human rights of victims. It is heartening to see such many eminent participants from the government, private sector, academia, and civil society taking such an active interest in trafficking in persons data in the ASEAN region. Thank you for your active participation in the polls. Your responses have helped us to establish a clearer picture of sense of what should be prioritized in collecting, analyzing, and reporting deep data. Your 12 teams panelists who have generously shared their expertise and perspectives on the importance of tracking in persons data. Thank you. Your invaluable insights made for a very rich and relevant discussion. And to the author and presenter of the baseline report, ASEAN-ACT Senior Advisor Kate Sumner, it was very timely and relevant to see how ASEAN member states have approached national reporting of the Convention's obligations on its fifth year in force. The 22 TIP data key performance indicators in this report show us that it is not difficult or costly to collect clear and consistent data on trafficking in persons. The link between publicly available data and victims' rights was also clear from your presentation. Victims have a right to know key pieces of information about trafficking in person cases to be able to make an informed decision about whether to participate in trial. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have heard, data helps us present our strengths and improvements and to identify the areas that remain challenging to address. It is a critical tool for policymakers, frontline responders, judiciary, and victims of trafficking themselves to support informed and evidence-based decision-making. I commend and appreciate all your labors and hard work in partaking on this endeavor in countering and preventing trafficking in persons. I hope that today's webinar has been a wonderful learning experience for everyone as we continue to support and promote stronger protection and support policies for victims of trafficking in line with our obligations in the ACT team. Thank you to all participants for your strong and engaged participation. Thank you very much and mabuhay!
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Morales. Mabuhay din po kayo for closing the webinar on such a high note. This was indeed very timely to talk about data after 5 years of active in-force and what areas needs to be prioritized and improved. So we hope everyone will have gained better understanding of the value of having a robust TIP data that is transparent, consistent, and regularly reported in an annual TIP report to be able to effectively respond to emerging patterns and measure the progress of implementing victim-sensitive approaches. So on behalf of ASEAN-ACT, please accept our warmest appreciation, His Honor, Dr. Haji Andy Samson Nganro, Prosecutor Minwarin Sisiribon, and of course, our very own Senior Advisor, Kate Sumner. Thank you so much. It has been very productive afternoon with you in the room. We can actually go on and talk about data, but apparently every webinar has to end. Big thanks to our ASEAN-ACT team leader, Dr. Lucia Paitropoulos, Communications Directors, Rowena Russell, and my co-moderator, of course, Archimedes Siguan, and other leadership team directors, country managers, and the team and all the energetic staff and translators behind the scene who made this webinar a success. So thank you again, everyone, for your time and for your sharing, and to all our participants for staying with us for more than 2 hours, actually. So hope to see you again in our next webinar, which will be on July 7 about evidence presentation, alternative modes of providing victim testimony in the courtroom. Equally as interesting, so we hope to see you again. But before that, please don't forget to fill up the one page feedback survey. The link is constantly being shared in our chat box for your easy reference to click on. All right. So thank you again. Thank you so much, Kate, Prosming, and of course, His Honor, Andy Sansan. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.